The battle for Mars revealed both humanity's incredible potential and the terrible cost of their awakening heritage. Commander Minho led ground forces equipped with architect weapons that channeled the user's thoughts into reality itself. The soldiers could shape metal with their minds and bend space to avoid enemy fire, but each use left marks on their souls that could never be erased. Wu Jin completed his analysis of captured devourer tissue and made a discovery that shattered everything. They thought they knew the creatures weren't originally alien at all. They were the transformed remains of species that had once been exactly like humanity, explorers and dreamers who had reached too far and lost themselves in the process of becoming gods. The devourers existed now as pure hunger wrapped in the twisted remnants of what they had once been. They retained fragments of memory from their original forms, but these memories only made them more dangerous. They knew how thinking beings behaved because they had once been thinking beings themselves. Pilot Hyun Woo pushed his architect fighter beyond all reasonable limits during a desperate battle in the asteroid belt. The ship responded by integrating more deeply with his nervous system, granting him the ability to see across multiple dimensions and predict enemy movements before they happened. But the connection was changing him in ways that frightened his friends. He could still speak to other humans, but the conversations felt distant and strange. Their concerns seemed small and their thoughts moved too slowly. He was becoming something more than human, but the price was his ability to connect with the people he was fighting to protect. The Empire faced rebellions across its territory as subject species learned the truth about their deliberate suppression. Defense Minister Hana received secret communications from resistance movements on dozens of worlds. They weren't fighting for independence, they were fighting for the right to grow and evolve beyond the limitations the Empire had imposed. But the rebellions came too late. The devourer fleets were spreading through Empire space faster than anyone could have imagined. Worlds that had been peaceful for thousands of years were being consumed overnight, and each victory made the creatures stronger and more coordinated. Admiral Vextar made a desperate offer to humanity. The Empire would recognize Earth's independence and withdraw all forces if humans would agree to contain the devourer threat without spreading architect technology to other species. The Admiral's real fear wasn't the monsters, it was what would happen when every civilization in the galaxy had access to reality shaping power. Architect Taemin revealed the complete truth about the ancient war to the human leadership. The architects hadn't just fought the devourers, they had created them in their pursuit of transcendence. Some architects had begun consuming the life force of entire worlds to fuel their transformation into beings of pure thought and energy. The creatures that became the devourers had once been the most brilliant and ambitious of the architects. They had believed that by absorbing the experiences and knowledge of other species they could become perfect beings, capable of understanding all of reality, but instead of transcendence, they found only endless hunger. The war that followed had been fought on levels beyond physical reality. Architect fought architect using weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. The galaxy itself had been scarred by battles that touched the very foundation of existence. Lieutenant Ji-hoon led an expedition to the galactic core where the original architect homeworld still existed. The journey required passing through space that had been twisted by the ancient war, where normal physics broke down and thoughts could become solid reality. What they found at the galactic core was both beautiful and terrifying. The architect homeworld was a monument to transcendence taken too far. Cities existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Technology responded to unformed thoughts, and at the center of it all were the remains of architects who had become something beyond recognition. The planet showed what humanity could become if they embraced their full heritage, but it also showed the price of that transformation. The beings who lived there were no longer individuals, but parts of a collective consciousness that spanned multiple realities. They had achieved perfect knowledge and perfect power, but they had lost everything that made existence meaningful. Ji-hoon and his team discovered records of the final days of architect civilization. The beings who had become the devourers had offered a choice to their former colleagues: join us and transcend all limitations, or remain trapped in your primitive individual existence. Most architects had chosen a third path. They scattered their knowledge and power across hidden worlds, then entered stasis, hoping that future generations would find a way to grow without losing their souls. The few who remained active chose to forget their power and live as ordinary beings. Engineer So Young made the breakthrough that changed everything while working with the Architect manufacturing systems. She discovered that the technology didn't have to corrupt its users if they approached it differently. The key was sharing the burden instead of trying to carry all the power alone. When humans work together, pooling their mental energy and supporting each other through the transformation process, they could use architect abilities without losing their humanity. The technology responded not just to individual will but to collective purpose and shared understanding. The revelation came just in time as the main Devourer fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system. Creatures that had consumed thousands of worlds poured out of dimensional rifts, their hunger focused on Earth, where the awakening architect technology called to them like a beacon. Captain Duhayan coordinated the defense using principles that hadn't been tested in 10,000 years. Human ships and architect technology working together with crews that shared the mental burden of reality shaping power. The fleet that faced the Devourers was unlike anything that had ever existed, but the enemy they faced was equally unprecedented. The Devourers had grown beyond their original forms, becoming living storms of consumed consciousness that could exist in multiple dimensions. Simultaneously, they attacked not just with weapons but with the absorbed despair and horror of every world they had destroyed. The battle would be fought not just in space but in the realm of thought and dream, where the outcome would determine whether consciousness itself had a future in the galaxy. The price of power was about to be paid in full, and nobody knew if humanity was strong enough to avoid the fate of their ancestors. Strategic analyst BORAM realized that the conventional tactics meant nothing in this kind of conflict. The Devourers couldn't be defeated by superior firepower or better strategy. They could only be stopped by beings who understood the true nature of transcendence and chose a different path. The final phase of humanity's test was beginning, and the outcome would echo across multiple realities for eternity. The ancient enemy had returned, but they faced descendants of the architects who had learned from 10,000 years of mistakes. The architect homeworld revealed the full scope of what humanity had inherited and the terrible burden that came with it. The planet existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously, with cities that responded to thoughts before they were formed, and technology that had achieved perfect efficiency by consuming the individuality of its creators. Strategic analyst BORAM coordinated the final battle as Devourer fleets poured through dimensional rifts across the galaxy. The Empire's forces were completely overwhelmed, their weapons useless against creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. But humanity faced an impossible choice: use their full architect heritage and risk becoming the monsters they fought, or hold back and watch reality itself be consumed. Captain Duhayan commanded a fleet of human vessels that had been transformed by architect technology. Each ship was crewed by volunteers who understood they might not remain human by the battle's end. The ancient power offered incredible abilities but demanded payment in the form of everything that made life worth living. Devourer assault was unlike anything in recorded history. They didn't just attack with weapons, they projected the absorbed consciousness of every world they had consumed. Entire star systems found themselves flooded with the despair and madness of civilizations that had been eaten alive. The psychological assault was as devastating as any physical weapon. Engineer So Young worked desperately to implement her discovery about shared consciousness. She had found that architect technology responded not just to individual will, but to collective purpose when humans worked together, supporting each other through the transformation process. They could wield ancient power without losing their souls. The breakthrough came during the battle for the outer solar system. Human pilots found that by linking their minds through the architect communication networks, they could share the burden of reality shaping power. Instead of one person carrying the full weight of transcendence, entire crews could work together to bend physics without breaking their sanity. Pilot Hin Wu led the first squadron to use the new techniques. His fighter was still integrated with his nervous system, but now the connection was shared among his wingmates. The power that had been isolating him from humanity became a bridge that connected him more deeply to his fellow pilots than ever before, but the Devourers adapted quickly to human tactics. They began targeting the mental links between human crews, trying to corrupt the shared consciousness that made the new strategy possible. Several ships were lost when their crews became trapped in feedback loops of absorbed alien despair. Dr. Sujin led a team of volunteers into the dimensional realm where the Devourers had been growing stronger for millennia. The journey required entering a space where thought and reality mixed together, where the line between self and universe disappeared entirely. What they found in that twisted dimension was both horrifying and heartbreaking. The Devourers weren't just mindless monsters, they were the preserved remains of countless species who had reached for transcendence and found only hunger. Each creature retained fragments of its original personality. Buried beneath layers of consumed consciousness, the final confrontation took place not in normal space but in the realm of pure thought, where the fundamental nature of existence could be directly challenged. Dr. Sujin and her team carried weapons that channeled humanity's greatest discovery, that power shared was power that didn't corrupt. The battle wasn't fought with energy beams or reality-warping technology, but with something the Devourers couldn't understand or counter: hope transmitted across billions of minds and shared among creatures who had chosen to remain connected to each other despite the temptation of individual transcendence. Humanity didn't defeat the Devourers by destroying them. Instead, they offered something that the ancient creatures had forgotten was possible: the chance to remember what they had been before hunger consumed them, and the opportunity to choose a different path. The process was dangerous, and many humans paid the ultimate price, opening their minds to creatures that had spent millennia consuming other consciousness. Required a level of trust and sacrifice that went beyond anything previously attempted, but slowly, impossibly, some of the Devourers began to remember they had once been explorers and artists and dreamers just like humanity. They had reached for the stars and built wonders that touched the foundations of reality. But in their quest to become more than mortal, they had lost sight of why existence mattered at all. The galaxy's transformation began with a single Devourer who chose to stop feeding and remember what it meant to feel wonder instead of hunger. The creature's change rippled through the dimensional network that connected all its kind, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the consuming stopped. Not all of the Devourers could be saved. Many had gone too far down the path of hunger to find their way back, but enough remembered their original nature to break the cycle of consumption that had threatened to devour all of reality. The Empire collapsed not through conquest, but through revelation. Species across the galaxy learned that growth and challenge were what made life worth living. The careful stagnation that had been imposed for millennia gave way to an explosion of development and discovery, but the new freedom came with responsibility. Every species now faced the same choice that had destroyed the original architects: use power to grow beyond current limitations while maintaining connection to others, or risk becoming isolated consumers of lesser beings. Humanity took on the role their ancestors had abandoned, not as rulers or guardians, but as teachers and companions for species making the journey toward transcendence. They carried both the knowledge of what was possible and the wisdom of what could go wrong. The story ended with a new mission launching from Earth. Captain Du Hyan commanded a ship crewed by humans and reformed Devourers working together to explore distant galaxies where the cycle might begin again. They carried no guarantee. Part 1. The arrival. Captain Du Hyan was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm bells started ringing across the exploration ship New Sol. The coffee cup fell from his hand and crashed on the metal floor as he rushed to the bridge. His crew was already there, pointing at the main screen with wide eyes and open mouths. The space around Earth looked different now. Instead of empty black dotted with distant stars, there were massive shapes blocking out the light. Ships so big they made Earth look like a small marble floating in space. The alien vessels had smooth curves and strange glowing parts that pulsed like a heartbeat. Du Hyan had never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Lieutenant Ji Woo turned from his station with a shaky voice. Captain, we are getting signals from the Surface Defense Minister Hana is calling all ships back to Earth immediately. She says this is not a drill. Du Hyan nodded and gave the order to change course toward home. As the New Sol moved closer to Earth, he could see more details of the Alien fleet. There were hundreds of ships. Some were as long as cities, others were round like giant metal planets. All of them had the same smooth design and the same pulsing lights on. Earth Defense Minister Hana stood in the emergency command center. Deep underground Seoul, the room buzzed with activity as military officers and scientists worked at computer screens trying to understand what was happening above their heads. Hana was a strong woman who had seen many crises, but nothing like this. Her hands stayed steady as she gave orders, but inside her heart was beating fast. The first message from the aliens came through all communication systems. At once, every radio, every television, every computer screen on Earth showed the same image. A tall figure in flowing robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. The being's face was humanoid, but longer and thinner than any human. Its eyes glowed with soft blue light. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Galactic Empire," the being spoke in perfect human language, though its mouth barely moved. "We bring greetings to the species of Earth, and news that will change your understanding of the universe." Hana ordered all military units to hold their positions and not fire unless attacked. She knew that any weapons Earth had would be useless against ships that size, but she also knew that showing fear would be the worst mistake they could make. Dr. Woojin was in his laboratory when the announcement came. He was one of Earth's best scientists, specializing in energy physics and space technology. As soon as he saw the alien ships, he began scanning them with every instrument he could find. The readings made no sense. The ships were using energy sources that shouldn't be possible and moving in ways that broke the laws of physics as humans understood them. Admiral Vextar continued his message. "Your species has developed to the point where contact can no longer be avoided. The Galactic Empire spans 12,000 star systems and includes over 3 million species. We have maintained peace and order for 10,000 of your Earth years." Alien Admiral paused, and his glowing eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at every person watching. "Our records show that your world sits in what we call a dead zone. These are regions of space where an ancient threat once existed. We have spent millennia ensuring that nothing from these zones ever awakens or spreads to threaten the galaxy." Hyan finally reached Earth orbit and could see the alien ships up close. They were even more impressive from this distance. The nearest ship was so large that the new Soul could have communications officer the Jin intercepted Empire transmissions that told a story of growing panic across their territory. Ships were vanishing on the outer rim of the galaxy. Entire colonies were going silent overnight, and the few survivors who escaped spoke of nightmares that walked between dimensions. The Devourers had returned, and they were hungry after their long sleep. The Empire forces that had spent so long keeping other species weak found themselves helpless against creatures that fed on the thoughts and emotions of living beings. The careful order that had lasted 10,000 years was crumbling in a matter of weeks. Architect Taemin worked with human scientists to explain what they were facing. The Devourers existed partially outside normal space and dimensions where thought and reality mixed together. They grew stronger by consuming the mental energy of entire civilizations, and each world they destroyed made them more powerful. Strategic Analyst Bioram coordinated Earth's defenses as both Empire and Devourer forces moved through the solar system. The Empire fleet was trying to maintain its blockade while fighting off attacks from creatures that could appear anywhere. Without warning, the space around Earth had become a three-way battlefield. Dr. Woojin studied captured Devourer technology brought back by human fighters and made discoveries that kept him awake at night. The creatures weren't just alien, they were what remained of species that had once been like humanity, civilizations that had reached for transcendence and lost themselves in the process. The Devourers had once been explorers and scientists and artists who pushed the boundaries of what was possible, but in their quest to become more than they had consumed their own souls piece by piece until only hunger remained. They existed now as living warnings of what could happen when power was pursued without wisdom. Captain Duhayan commanded an architect dreadnought that had emerged from beneath the Pacific Ocean. The ship was larger than anything humanity had ever built, and its weapons could reshape reality on a local scale. But each time he used the ship's full power, he felt something slip away from his humanity. The first Major battle came when a Devourer fleet attacked the Empire forces near Mars. The alien creatures moved in perfect coordination as if they shared a single mind. Their ships weren't built, they were grown from the absorbed essence of countless worlds. And each vessel pulsed with the trapped consciousness of entire species. Pilot Hyun Woo led the human fighters into the battle and discovered that architect technology could hurt the Devourers in ways Empire weapons couldn't. The ancient ships fired beams of pure order that forced the chaotic creatures back into normal space where they could be destroyed. But the cost was enormous. Each shot drained years from the pilots' lives. The Empire fleet broke and ran, leaving Earth to face the Devourers. Alone, Admiral Vextar's last transmission was a warning that the creatures were just scouts. The main Devourer force was still building its strength in the dimensions between galaxies, preparing for an invasion that would consume every thinking. Being a normal space engineer, So Young worked frantically to activate more architect defense systems as reports came in from around the world. The ancient structures were revealing their true purpose. They weren't just weapons or factories, they were nodes in a network designed to defend reality itself from invasion by beings from other dimensions. But the awakening of so much architect technology was having unexpected effects. Humans who worked closely with the ancient machines found their thoughts becoming faster and clearer, but also stranger. They could see patterns in reality that had been invisible before, and their minds began operating on multiple levels at once. Commander Minho led ground forces equipped with architect weapons that responded to the user's will and shaped reality according to their needs. A soldier could imagine armor and have it appear. A medic could will wounds to heal faster than nature allowed, but each use changed the person wielding the power in ways nobody fully understood. The battle for Mars became a test of everything humanity had learned. The Devourers attacked in waves, each one stronger than the last, and the human forces found themselves pushed to their limits. The architect technology offered incredible power but demanded payment in the form of the user's original nature. Dr. Sujin made the most disturbing discovery of all while studying the ancient records. The architects hadn't just fought the Devourers, they had created them. The war 10,000 years ago hadn't been between different species, but between two visions of what intelligent life should become. Some architects had believed that transcendence required consuming other forms of life to fuel their evolution. They had started by absorbing the knowledge and experiences of primitive species, but eventually began consuming entire civilizations. The beings who became the Devourers had once been architects who went too far. The other architects had opposed this path, leading to a civil war that nearly destroyed the galaxy. The final battle had been fought not with weapons but with competing visions of reality itself. The architects who chose restraint had won, but the victory had cost them everything. Taemin revealed the final truth to the human leadership. The architects hadn't just scattered to hide from the Devourers, they had scattered to prevent themselves from becoming Devourers. The power to reshape reality was addictive, and those who used it too much eventually lost the ability to see other beings as anything more than sources of energy. Earth's defense network was nearly complete, but the cost was becoming clear. Humans who had worked closely with architect technology were changing. In fundamental ways, they were becoming smarter and more powerful, but also more distant from ordinary human emotions and connections. The galaxy faced a terrible choice: use the architect technology to fight the returning Devourers and risk becoming monsters themselves, or hold back and watch as reality itself was consumed by creatures that had once been heroes. The ancient enemy wasn't just threatening to destroy civilization, it was threatening to corrupt anyone who fought against Jin. Received the final Empire transmission before their communication network collapsed entirely. The Devourers had broken through the outer defenses and were moving toward the galactic core. Earth stood alone against an enemy that had consumed countless worlds and grown stronger with each victory. The hunt was entering its final phase, and humanity had to choose whether to become the monsters they were fighting or find a third path that their ancestors had never discovered. The fate of every thinking being in the galaxy rested on the decision of a species that had only just remembered its true heritage. The Empire's response came at dawn when Admiral Vextar's fleet opened fire on Earth's major cities, the energy beams that could destroy mountains struck the ancient structures and simply disappeared. The architect defenses had activated, creating shields that absorbed attacks and grew stronger with each hit. Pilot Hyun-woo was in the underground hangar beneath Seoul when the first new ships emerged from manufacturing bays that hadn't existed hours before. The craft were sleek and silver-shaped. Like teardrops with no visible engines or weapons, he climbed into the cockpit of the nearest fighter and felt the ship respond to his thoughts before he even touched the controls. The moment Hyun-woo took off, he understood why the Empire was afraid. The architect fighter didn't just fly through space, it stepped outside normal physics. The ship could be in 3 places at once or nowhere at all, depending on what the pilot needed. It was like flying a piece of controlled lightning. Mechanic Dae-yoon worked in the expanding underground facilities that seemed to grow larger every hour. The architect technology was teaching itself how to build more technology. Each machine that came online immediately began building better versions of itself. The manufacturing process was accelerating beyond anything human industry had ever achieved above. Ground Commander Minho organized the evacuation of civilians into the architect structures. The buildings had revealed vast underground cities complete with living spaces, farms, and everything needed to sustain millions of people, but they had also revealed something else. Weapons platforms that rose from the earth to challenge the Empire fleet. The Empire ships found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. Human pilots in architect fighters appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Their weapons didn't just damage Empire vessels, they seemed to drain the energy from them. The careful formations that had dominated space battles for thousands of years became useless against opponents who could ignore the laws of physics. Admiral Vexstar sent a message across the galaxy calling every species that owed loyalty to the Empire. The transmission was broadcast on all frequencies and contained a simple message: the architects have returned. All civilizations must contribute ships and soldiers to contain this threat before it spreads beyond Earth. But the Empire's message had an unexpected effect. Species across the galaxy began asking questions they had never been allowed to ask before. Why were they forbidden from developing certain technologies? Why did the Empire destroy any civilization that grew too advanced? Why had they been kept weak for so long? Dar Sujin worked with architect Taemin in the Seoul facility, analyzing data from across the galaxy. The Empire hadn't just been maintaining peace, they had been deliberately suppressing technological development. Any species that discovered faster than light travel beyond the Empire's approved methods was either destroyed or forced back to primitive levels. The truth was worse than anyone had imagined. The Empire's peace was built on ensuring that no civilization could ever challenge them. They had spent 10,000 years turning a galaxy full of potential into a controlled preserve where species were kept at exactly the level of development the Empire wanted. Yun-woo led a squadron of human pilots in their first major battle against the Empire fleet. The architect fighters moved through the enemy formation like sharks through a school of fish. Empire weapons couldn't track targets that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and Empire shields couldn't stop attacks that bypassed normal space entirely. But the victory came with a price. Each time Hyun-woo used the fighter's full capabilities, he felt something change inside him. The ship was integrating with his nervous system, teaching him to think in ways that weren't entirely human. He was becoming something more than human, but also something less. Yoon discovered that the architect manufacturing systems were producing more than just weapons and ships. They were building communication networks that connected every awakening facility on Earth. The planet was becoming a single massive machine designed for one purpose: preparing for the return of humanity's ancient enemy. The Empire fleet pulled back from Earth, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they established a blockade around the solar system. Nothing was allowed to enter or leave. Earth was to be contained until the Empire could find a way to destroy the awakening architects without triggering the very catastrophe they feared. Commander Minho received reports from the expanding underground cities. The facilities were much larger than anyone had realized. They stretched across entire continents, connected by transport systems that could move people and supplies anywhere on Earth in minutes. The architects had built humanity a fortress that could survive anything, but Dr. Sujin made a discovery that changed everything. The Empire wasn't just afraid of the architects returning, they were afraid of what the architects' return would awaken monitoring stations. On the edge of the galaxy were detecting movement in the spaces between dimensions. Something that had been waiting was stirring. Tae-min confirmed humanity's worst fears. The Devourers hadn't been destroyed in the ancient war, they had been forced into a kind of hibernation in dimensions parallel to normal space. The Empire's careful suppression of galactic civilization had been designed to keep them sleeping, but the awakening of architect technology was like a beacon calling them home. The first Devourer scout ships appeared at the edge of the solar system, twisted amalgamations of metal and something that might once have been alive. They moved in ways that violated every law of physics, and when they attacked Empire vessels, the alien ships were drained not just of power but of the life force of their crews. Admiral Vexstar tried one last time to negotiate with Earth, offering humanity a place in the Empire if they would shut down the architect systems, but it was too late. The awakening couldn't be stopped, and the Devourers were already responding to it. Kal Yun-woo watched from his fighter as more Devourer ships poured out of dimensional rifts. The Empire fleet was breaking apart, unable to fight an enemy that existed partially outside normal space. The careful balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for 10,000 years was collapsing. The hunt had begun, but nobody knew yet whether humanity would be the hunters or the prey. The ancient enemy was returning, and the galaxy's fate would be decided by descendants of the architects, who had forgotten their own power until it was almost too late. Lieutenant Ji-hoon led his squad through the streets of Seoul toward the massive structure that had risen from the earth. The building was 3 times taller than any skyscraper and seemed to be growing larger every hour. Its surface was smooth, like polished stone, but it pulsed with inner light that made strange patterns across its walls. The military had set up barriers around the structure, but they seemed useless. The building paid no attention to human weapons or warnings. It simply continued its slow awakening like a giant waking up from a very long sleep. Ji-hoon had volunteered to lead the first team inside because someone had to find out what was happening. As they approached the main entrance, a doorway opened in the seamless wall. The opening was perfectly shaped for humans to walk through, which was the first surprise. The second surprise was that the corridor inside was lit with warm golden light that felt familiar and welcoming instead of cold and alien. Engineers so young worked frantically in the command center trying to understand what was happening to Earth. Her computers showed that similar structures were activating all over the world. Each building was connected to the others through some kind of network that operated faster than light. The technology was so advanced that human instruments could barely detect it inside the Seoul structure. Ji-hoon and his team walked through corridors that seemed to change as they moved. The walls showed images of stars and planets, but not the ones visible from Earth. These were star maps of places humanity had never seen, galaxies beyond anything human telescopes had ever found. The images moved and shifted as if the walls were alive deep in the heart of the structure. They found a chamber larger than a football stadium. At its center stood something that made them all stop and stare. It was a crystal coffin filled with glowing liquid, and inside the coffin was a human being. The figure looked like a man about 30 years old with Asian features and black hair. He was dressed in clothes that seemed to be made of the same material as the building itself. The liquid around him bubbled and glowed, and as they watched his eyes open, Ed, so young, detected the moment of awakening from her computers. The energy readings from all the structures around the world spiked at exactly the same time. Whatever was happening in Seoul was connected to everything else. The buildings were not separate, they were parts of one massive system that spanned the entire planet. The man in the crystal coffin sat up and the liquid drained away. He stepped out onto the chamber floor and looked at Ji-hoon and his soldiers with eyes that seemed much older than his face. His first words were in perfect Korean, though his voice had a strange quality, as if it came from far away. Architect Tae-min, he said, and I have been sleeping for a very long time. Welcome, my descendants, to the awakening you were never supposed to see. Ji-hoon tried to speak but found his voice caught in his throat. The man looked completely human, but the way he moved and the power radiating from him made it clear he was something much more. The chamber around them began to change, walls flowing like water to create new shapes and displace them in, walked to the center of the chamber and raised his hand. The walls filled with images of space, but not as humans knew it. These pictures showed vast cities, floating between stars and ships that moved through dimensions instead of just through space technology that made the Galactic Empire's fleet look primitive. Your ancestors were the architects, Taman explained, and we built the first great civilization in this galaxy. We did not just explore space, we shaped it. We created pathways between stars and built wonders that touched the very foundations of reality. So Young watched her instruments as more data flowed in from the awakening structures. The technology was analyzing human genetic codes and finding patterns that shouldn't exist. Humans carried DNA sequences that matched no other species on Earth. It was as if they had been designed rather than evolved. Our expansion brought us into contact with something else, Taman continued. The displays showed creatures that hurt to look at, beings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. They fed on the minds of thinking creatures and grew stronger with each world they consumed. We called them the Devourers. The war that followed nearly destroyed everything. Taman gestured, and the walls showed battles fought across entire solar systems, weapons that could destroy stars and defenses that bent space itself. The scale was beyond anything humans had ever imagined. Even the Galactic Empire at its height had never wielded such power. We realized that we had two choices, Taman said, his voice heavy with old pain. We could continue fighting until nothing remained of any civilization in the galaxy, or we could try something that had never been attempted before. Ji-hoon finally found his voice. What did you do? Scattered, Taman replied. We hid our knowledge and our weapons on thousands of worlds, then went into stasis to wait. The architects who remained awake chose to live simple lives, to forget their power and become something new. They became humanity. So Young ran the calculations, and the results made her hands shake. The genetic markers, the hidden technology, the way humans had developed faster than any species should have been able to. It all made sense now. Humanity wasn't just another species that had evolved on Earth. They were the descendants of beings who had once ruled the galaxy. Earth was chosen as the primary vault, Taman continued, because it was far from the major space lanes and close to several other hidden worlds. When the time came when the galaxy needed the architects again, the awakening would begin. But the Galactic Empire had found Earth first. Their careful plans to keep civilizations weak and controlled had worked for 10,000 years. Until humanity started to reach for the stars, the Empire's arrival had triggered the very awakening they feared most. Taman looked at Ji-hoon with eyes full of ancient sadness. The Empire built their peace on the ruins of our civilization. They maintain order by ensuring that no species ever becomes powerful enough to challenge them, but they also know that the Devourers were never truly defeated, only contained. Now that the architects are awakening, the Devourers will sense it. They will return to finish what they started 10,000 years ago. Taman turned to look at the displays showing the Empire fleet surrounding Earth, and the Empire knows they cannot fight them alone. As So Young watched as her computers detected new activity from structures around the world. Manufacturing systems that had been dormant for millennia were coming online. Weapons and ships were being built using principles that human science didn't understand. The architects were preparing for war. Ji-hoon looked at Taman and asked the question that terrified him most. What happens to humanity now? Taman smiled, but it was not a happy expression. You will remember who you truly are, and you will face the choice that destroyed us. Will you use power to protect others, or will you use it to protect yourselves? The answer will determine whether this galaxy has a future or falls into eternal darkness. Captain De Hyon was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm bells started ringing across the exploration ship. New Soul, the coffee cup fell from his hand and crashed on the metal floor. As he rushed to the bridge, his crew was already there, pointing at the main screen with wide eyes and open mouths. The space around Earth looked different now. Instead of empty black dotted with distant stars, there were massive shapes blocking out the light. Ships so big they made Earth look like a small marble floating in space. The alien vessels had smooth curves and strange glowing parts that pulsed like a heartbeat. Du-hyen had never seen anything so beautiful and terrifying. At the same time, Lieutenant Ji-woo turned from his station with a shaky voice. Captain, we are getting signals from the surface. Defense Minister Hana is calling all ships back to Earth immediately, she says this is not a Drildohyan, nodded and gave the order to change course toward home as the new soul moved closer. To Earth he could see more details of the alien fleet. There were hundreds of ships, some were as long as cities, others were round like giant metal planets. All of them had the same smooth design and the same pulsing lights on Earth. Defense Minister Hana stood in the emergency command center deep underground Seoul. The room buzzed with activity as military officers and scientists worked at computer screens trying to understand what was happening above their heads. Hana was a strong woman who had seen many crises, but nothing like this. Her hand stayed steady as she gave orders, but inside her heart was beating fast. The first message from the aliens came through all communication systems at once. Every radio, every television, every computer screen on Earth showed the same image, a tall figure in flowing robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. The being's face was humanoid but longer and thinner than any human. Its eyes glowed with soft blue light. I am Admiral Vextar. The Galactic Empire. The being spoke in perfect human language, though its mouth barely moved. We bring greetings to the species of Earth and news that will change your understanding of the universe. Hana ordered all military units to hold their positions and not fire unless attacked. She knew that any weapons Earth had would be useless against ships that size, but she also knew that showing fear would be the worst mistake they could make. Dr. Wu Jin was in his laboratory when the announcement came. He was one of Earth's best scientists, specializing in energy physics and space technology. As soon as he saw the alien ships, he began scanning them with every instrument he could find. The readings made no sense. The ships were using energy sources that shouldn't be possible and moving in ways that broke the laws of physics as humans understood them. Admiral Vextar continued his message. Your species has developed to the point where contact can no longer be avoided. The Galactic Empire spans 12,000 star systems and includes over 3 million species. We have maintained peace and order for 10,000 of your Earth years. The alien admiral paused, and his glowing eyes seemed to look directly through the screen at every person watching. Our records show that your world sits in what we call a dead zone. These are regions of space where an ancient threat once existed. We have spent millennia ensuring that nothing from these zones ever awakens or spreads to threaten. The Galactic finally reached Earth orbit and could see the alien ships up close. They were even more impressive from this distance. The nearest ship was so large that the new soul could have landed in one of its docking bays. The surface of the alien vessel was covered in symbols that seemed to move and change as he watched. Hana received reports from around the world. Similar alien fleets had appeared over every major city on Earth. The beings seemed to know exactly where human civilization was strongest. They weren't hiding or being subtle. They wanted everyone to see their power. Dr. Wu Jin made his first important discovery. The alien ships weren't just floating in space. They were connected to each other by some kind of energy field that he could barely detect with his instruments. It was as if all the ships were really just parts of one enormous machine. Admiral Vextar delivered the news that changed everything. We offer your species 2 choices you may accept. Vassal status within the Galactic Empire. We will relocate your population to suitable worlds where you can live peacefully under our protection and guidance. Your current world will be sealed and made safe. The second choice was left unspoken, but everyone understood it. The alien admiral didn't need to say what would happen if humanity refused, but as the hours passed, strange things began happening on Earth. Deep beneath major cities around the world, sensors detected energy readings that made no sense. Dr. Wu Jin was the first to notice the pattern. The readings were getting stronger, and they seemed to be responding to the presence of the alien ships in Seoul. Hana received reports of similar energy spikes beneath New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and dozens of other cities. The readings were coming from deep underground, much deeper than any human structure had ever been built. The energy signatures didn't match anything in human science. Dr. Wu Jin worked through the night analyzing the strange readings. He discovered that the energy was organized in patterns too complex to be natural. It was technology, but not human technology. The signals seemed to be communicating with each other across the planet using methods that ignored distance and time. As dawn broke over Seoul, the first structure began to rise. The ground in the center of the city cracked and split apart as something massive pushed up from below. It was made of the same smooth material as the alien ships, but the design was different, more angular, more purposeful, more threatening. Similar structures were rising from beneath cities all over Earth. The alien fleet immediately changed its behavior. Ships that had been floating peacefully suddenly powered up their weapons and began moving into defensive positions. Admiral Vexstar appeared on screens around the world one final time. His calm expression was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. "The architects have awakened," he said, and his voice was no longer steady. "May the galaxy forgive us for what comes next." The transmission cut off and the alien ships began pulling back from Earth, but they didn't leave. Instead, they formed a ring around the planet with all their weapons pointed downward. The peaceful first contact had become a siege, and humanity was trapped in the middle. High and watched from the bridge of the new Sol as more structures rose from Earth's surface. Each one was different, but they all had the same purpose. They were waking up after sleeping for a very long time, and their awakening terrified the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Hannah stood in the command center looking at reports flooding in from around the world. The structures weren't just rising. They were activating. Ancient systems that predated human civilization were coming online, and Earth itself was becoming something it had never been before, a fortress built by beings who had vanished long before humans learned to make fire. The first part of humanity's greatest test was beginning, and nobody knew what the ancient architects had left sleeping beneath their feet.